like to introduce our next panelist by himself. We have none other than Kurt Ekert from from Sabre. He's the CEO and president of Sabre. Kurt, welcome to the stage. So one thing that they don't know that's pretty cool is we both there's counties in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia County, Chester County. Delaware County is the greatest county in Pennsylvania.
Here, here.
And we both went to school in the same county many, many years ago, many moons ago. Yeah. But probably, I think we figured out the same graduating class, but just different high schools.
And in fact, so I went to Radnor High School, which is a suburb of Philadelphia. The movie Grease, who's old enough to remember that movie? Was actually Rydell High School was based on Radnor, allegedly.
On Radnor? I didn't know that.
Wasn't that cool when I went there, but...
I went in the more rougher area, a little rough around the edges, southern Delaware County, and the movie Silver Linings Playbook was filmed right in Upper Darby, which is the town right next to where I grew up in Drexel. Went to Bonner High School. So who would have thought two Delco kids up on stage here to talk about travel?
Yeah, we have low standards. We're going to try to exceed them.
I didn't do justice on your career, who you are. Why don't you share with the audience a little bit about who is Kurt?
I'm no longer as young a man as I once hoped I was, but I've spent now 27 years in the travel industry. So I was an Army officer before that, and that includes Continental Airlines. I was with Cendant back when that was a large travel conglomerate, and have been basically an officer at Orbitz, the company called GTA or Gulliver's, which at the time was the largest bed bank or hotel wholesaler in the world. Then was the number 2 guy at Travelport when that business IPO'd in 2014. Was the CEO of CWT for 5 years and joined Sabre last year. So I've been airline, GDS, TMC, OTA, and bed bank. Also ran a corporate booking tool along the way. So have a deep appreciation for what everybody here does and the value that you all bring.
So you have the literal 360 view of the entire industry.
I think so. Yeah, I understand the madness behind the method, depending on the perspective. Yes.
Excellent. So let's dive into one of the first questions. And Kurt actually gave me permission on the side. He said, you can ask me anything. So we have a little bit of some questions, but then I might dive into those anything questions as well. What's your personal insight on now the pace of change happening with technology in the industry?
Yeah. There's two. If you look at travel technology over a 20, 25-year continuum, there are two major themes that I think have been there and they continue and they're accelerating. One is the sort of e-commerce consumerization of travel, and that is the consumer taking hold of the way they shop and interact with product. And the same way that they go after Google or Amazon or Shopify, they've gone after travel the same way. The best example of that would be, the rise of the OTAs and basically the shift online that has happened very aggressively. The flip side of that is you've seen these massive e-commerce players arise, Booking, Expedia, Ctrip, Google, and you've seen all the suppliers in the world try to replicate that and say, yeah, we operate aircraft or we operate hotels, but actually what we want to be are first-class retailers. And so the way that suppliers and intermediaries go to market and the way consumers expect to consume travel is very different than it was 20 years ago. That is accelerating, and simply because you're a buyer in a corporate environment doesn't mean you're immune from that, because your employees have the expectation that it should be just like their consumer experience despite all of the complexity that exists in your world. So those are some of the key things. With generative AI as we go forward, I think the pace of change and the level of innovation is going to exceed in the next 10 years, which probably happened in the last 30. So your cheese is going to move substantially in terms of what your role is and what the expectation of your CFO and your travelers are.
And as a follow-up to that, when Rebecca was up here on stage, one of the keys to success is communication of that change. So this is one of the side questions.
Yeah.
Whose responsibility is that? Who owns the communication to those travelers as we see this fast-moving pace of change?
It's interesting. I remember being at CWT, and when I joined there in 2016, there was this very strong feeling we, CWT, the TMC, should own the relationship with the end traveler. My perspective is it's a partnership between the TMC and the travel manager. And the travel manager has to be the tip of the spear and the point, and should be supported by their TMC and or technology partners. But it's very difficult to do because the consumer has unlimited access to information And they certainly don't know what NDC is for the most part, for example. I know that's your favorite word, especially for the airlines in the room.
Can I interrupt? Know or care.
But for them, they just simply want to know why is there this policy here? Why can't I just go beat the travel agent and book myself? What is the virtue and the value of duty of care and of comparison shopping and all these things that you're saying are so important? And you've got to come to the traveler in a way that's very simplistic, but very on point. You can't do it and sort of say, here's our policy in 7 pages. You've got to figure out how to do it in like, here's the 3 points and the 3 values we add. And for the traveler or the consumer, they want choice, they want value, they want their loyalty, and they want efficiency. And if you disturb those things, they're going to think that you're impeding their ability to do their job or that they're smarter than you. And those things are not true, but that's the challenge there. And so I think what the greatest challenge I saw when I was in the TMC role was how do you communicate that story to the traveler in a way that grabs them. It is hard.
Yeah. So for the travel managers in the room, and the travelers are disconnected another level from the GDS, from the global distribution system, your baby. What's the current value or relevancy of the GDS to everybody sitting right here in the room?
Yeah, I had retired from the industry and thought I was done forever. And then thought, you know what, I'll take a second round at the GDS because it's such a fun part of the industry. And I think of the GDS as the technical plumbing of the travel industry. We are the pipes and the content and the technology that underlies what airlines or hoteliers do or what TMCs do or what booking tools do. And so very important part of the industry. If you, who's old enough to remember fax machines? All right, this is an older audience than I expected. So if you can imagine trying to sell the first fax machine to a business back in 1985 or whatever it was, that's a difficult sale because the value of the fax machine is the network effect. And what the GDS solves, sort of like cable television solves or like, let's say Bloomberg solves, is the network effect. We bring many to many from a content and a buyer perspective and basically make that a very efficient, very relevant search experience. And for suppliers, we bring access to a lot of eyeballs that would be very difficult to reach otherwise in all channels. And so the best analogy I can draw in terms of where the GDS is today and where we're going to go is I mentioned cable television. So think of EDIFACT, if everybody's heard of EDIFACT in the world of NDC. So EDIFACT is, think of it as cable television content. It's travel content. We're basically consuming that, and we're distributing that through buyers of all categories. What's happened more recently, and that model has worked very well for everybody in the food chain. And despite rumors of our pricing, we generally approximate 1% to 2% of the value of a ticket in terms of the cost of distribution. So a fairly efficient cost of distribution as compared to many industries. What's happening now with NDC, and you're seeing this also in the hotel world because hotels have relatively less command and control of distribution than do airlines because of the nature of hotel ownership, is a refragmentation of content to where you're seeing a lot of early stage players come in, or airlines, for example, say direct connect into us, and that's going to, you're going to be able to get all these Scooby snacks, all these benefits you can't get through other channels. And the problem is, if you think about why the GDS exists in the first place or why cable television exists in the first place, I'm a consumer of ESPN. I like sports. If tomorrow ESPN disappeared from my cable channel, which happened recently, then my ability to consume ESPN and plug it into my devices or my TV is nearly impossible. I don't have the technical prowess, I don't have the capital, and so I'm relying on that intermediary to solve that on my behalf. Likewise, ESPN needs them to access my eyeballs because I can't consume them directly. Now, I could go plug into ESPN discreetly and CBS and everybody else, but the efficiency of that is horrid. And so in a world of NDC, what's going to be very important is that we in the market position we sit in, where we connect buyers and sellers, is we are normalizing that content. We're normalizing the relevancy of search. So, for example, all of the business algorithms that your TMC puts around or your online booking tool puts around the consumption of travel, we're able to do that whether it's legacy cable TV content or NDC or what I call streaming content. And unlike what the cable television companies did, which is they ceded that territory to the streaming players, what I think we can do, and we're doing very aggressively, is we're trying to combine that and say to the airline, if you want to distribute EDIFACT, that's great. You want to distribute NDC, that's great. Obviously, we want to get commercials that are rational for all parties. And then we'll normalize that, we'll unredistribute it, where all of the routines and the things that you do on behalf of your buyers, we're able to keep as relatively normal and efficient as possible. And that's the opportunity and that's the challenge for the industry. If that doesn't happen, and you get in this world of, theoretically, there was no GDS, now you're in a world of direct connects, and you're plugging in individual nodes into something that's not a core platform center. Massive loss of efficiency, massive loss of comparison shopping. It will be very difficult for you to stare your CFOs in the eyes or your travelers in the eyes and prove to them that you're bringing them the best content and that you're doing it in a way that's a consumer-grade experience. So I think our mission today is probably as or more important than it was yesterday. The complexity of that is tremendous, and so the key for us is a scale game, and we are in a technology arms race. We're deploying a tremendous amount of capital toward this, but I think you'd rather that we do that than you have to worry about that yourself. There really are not any TMCs in the world who are equipped to do this without the help of a technology partner.
I agree 1,000%. So here's one of those questions where you said I could ask you anything. On a scale, on a spectrum, how far are you apart in the commercial conversation right now with current model and needs of the future model?
I always approach it, and with NDC, there are two components. One is technology, two is economics. On the technology side, there's very strong alignment, and one of the challenges is as you implement a carrier's NDC solution, each of them is bespoke or customized. So each of them can take 3 to 9 months to do and do properly. It's very easy to plug into the API and say, I have NDC. But to make it work at industrial grade with millisecond response times and make it work with all the routines you have, that actually takes a lot of time. The other side of that is, it was interesting, for example, when we launched American earlier this year, we heard very strong conviction from our TMC partners, hey, there's lots of functionality you have to solve before this will work in our environment. I think we have 588 use cases specific to TMCs that we are solving. We'll be 90% complete with those by the end of October. So we're getting to the point where we're getting to that normalization. And again, the challenge there is each of them is relatively unique from a carrier perspective. On the commercial side, what I've said publicly, which is what I can share here, is in much of the world, there is a nominal or no differential economically between NDC and EDIFACT or legacy content. Where that is different is in Europe. For me, that's only about 15% of my bookings. For my competitors, that's a bigger part of their footprint. But GDS booking fees in Europe are about double, and I say Europe point of sale, about double what they are in the rest of the world. So there's more of what you might call an economic disequilibrium in Europe than there is in the rest of the world. And there is a pretty deep differential in the economics there. And so for your business that derives non-US point of sale, UK point of sale, it is substantial. That has impacts the profitability of the TMC. That may have impact to the commercials with your corporate customers, but that's where it's most substantial. And the conundrum here, or the challenge, and I remember joining Sabre last year, and the CFO we had at the time, who's no longer with the company, said, I don't get the business case for NDC. Because in mass, it's going to be slightly dilutive to the company, to Sabre. And I said, that is the case. What we have to do is make sure we enhance the value proposition, both buyer and supplier facing, and we've got to play for a stronger denominator of transactions. So having to go to Travel Fusion for certain low-cost carrier content, or having to go elsewhere for that NDC content, to me that's unacceptable. Our role is to make sure we are the ubiquitous platform on which you shop and book that travel. So I think there is an impact. Now, if you go to date and you look at corporate travel, less than 1% of corporate travel is being booked through NDC. But I think the growth is going to be exponential going forward because the religious fervor that many large carriers have to make this work is substantial. And I'd say to date, what you've seen is not the creation of a significant amount of new content, but rather the movement of certain content from the legacy channel to the new channel. I think that will change over time with continuous pricing and some of the actions that you'll see American or United or certain other carriers face. So whether you like it or not, you better have the right TMC and technology partnership so that this is there and it's ubiquitous across all of your channels.
Thank you very much. You brought up the term religious fervor. So I'm going to borrow that for a second and talk about my parents when they would have us go to church. They said half the commitment of your faith is just going and being there. So I'll use that analogy. half of the travel buyers in the room, or half of their commitment, all of the travel buyers in the room, is being here and getting educated on that.
Yeah.
The other is what you do afterwards. So share with the group, why do you personally feel it's important for them, whether they're in programs that are spending $500,000 in air or $25 million in air, why is it important for them to be here?
So great question. I think first of all, for all the travel managers, you have really hard jobs. So you're satisfying duty of care, cost, efficiency, productivity, user experience, data protection. There's all sorts of stuff there, and you have many stakeholders. So you have to please your CFO and your head of procurement, who are very data and financially driven. You have to basically partner with, let's say, the division or the operating heads, who look at travel as a necessary cost, but basically they look at it in terms of what's the productivity or the benefit I'm getting in the business. So you need to be able to quantify that for them. And then with the travelers, who are smarter than all of us, you need to basically be able to win their trust so that they're not doing things because they're compelled to do them, but because they realize it's right for the corporation and it's right for them as individuals. So that's a really hard thing to do. So for all of you as you walk away, I think these sort of engagements are critical so that you have that understanding to manage these different stakeholder groups, to hold your TMC accountable, to hold your booking partners accountable, et cetera. And what you'll hear from certain parties is, I don't mean this negatively to anybody in the room, is their own filtered or biased viewpoint of the world. So people will often speak, and I'm calling out suppliers here, they'll speak from the standpoint of what's in it for them. And if you think NDC is the virtuous side of it is to say we're going to improve consumer experience and we're going to make it more dynamic from a technology standpoint, and those things are great. But if you think they're doing this because they're altruistic and they want to give you more discounts, no retailer in the world would want to do that. That would be irrational. They're doing it because it's a mechanism to mitigate comparison shopping and to drive up yields. Very smart, what any retailer in any industry does. But you have to understand that as you listen to what they're asking you to do or telling you things, and then you can figure out as you triangulate that conversation with a TMC or a GDS or anybody else in the industry or your colleagues, what does that mean for me in how I run my program? And there's not a one-size-fits-all answer, and in a dynamically shifting world, I can give you my point of view, and I have 27 years of experience and lots of gray hair or white hair, but that doesn't mean that's the right answer. It's my point of view, and you have to be well-informed enough to develop your own point of view that makes sense for you and for the job that you're in. But I'd urge you not to listen to one party unilaterally. If you're confused, ask questions, because a lot of the stuff that's out there is really confusing, and it doesn't make sense. And you'll hear, for example, early stage companies come in the industry and they'll make simplifying assumptions about what a corporate travel program is. You'll see certain TMCs do that, again, certain tech companies. And on the surface, they're right. It is that simple. But in reality, it's not. And that's why you don't see those companies scale very easily. And again, I think about this network effect, for example, of my company. If I execute properly, it will be difficult for somebody to replicate what I'm doing with similar value. Now, I have to go execute it. But if they come in and they say, I've solved shopping for NDC, but they haven't done it for the universe of content that you're accessing, that's not that useful. And so I would just say, listen to all sources, read a lot, take things with a grain of salt, and don't just assume that people are altruistic in their views on what they're trying to espouse.
Excellent. Talk about opinion, and I shared an op-ed with the BTN. Elizabeth picked it up from the BTN, and it compared NDC to the Rubik's Cube. Everybody played the Rubik's Cube growing up, and neither one are identified, do I say, are a bad thing. Rubik's Cube was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But it was really difficult to solve for more than one side. Some people in the room probably could have solved for 2 or 3 sides, but very few people in the world can grab a Rubik's Cube and solve the entire thing. I think NDC is at that point where there are suppliers who are solving for one side and saying, look, I have all the red, right, but the rest of the cube on the other side, it just is all mangled and disjointed with all the other colors.
Yeah, look, it's a great analogy. As I mentioned, it's not just plugging into the airline API is the most simple part of what we're doing here. Solving for the 588 use cases, which is phase 1, in order to make it so that you can do your job on behalf of your clients without degrading the performance of the technology, that's fundamental. Mm-hmm. I think we and maybe one or one and a half other players in the world are well positioned to do this. But yeah, that's a great analogy. And so if you, again, imagine a world where you're trying to watch television, you have no streaming service, you have no cable television, and you have to plug in every channel yourself and figure it out. That's a recipe for disaster when agent productivity time has gone the wrong way in the post-COVID world.
Right. Well, at the end of the article, my statement was, my money is on the GDSs. You guys are going to be the ones, like you said, there's one or two that need to figure it out.
Yeah.
And
well, I think we're playing defense and we're playing offense if we do this properly.
Yep.
It is fundamental that we get this right on your behalf and on behalf of the sellers.
Excellent, thank you. Let's open up to any questions in the audience for Kurt.
Talked a lot about NDC. Do you want to talk a little bit about AI and how you guys are thinking about the use of AI? We've heard a lot about it. Maybe you can help make it real for us in terms of how you guys are integrating AI into your tech stack.
Yeah, we actually, we're privileged to have a pretty deep strategic relationship with Google. We've been migrating from mainframe to Google Cloud. And Google's actually organized their company now around generative AI. I don't think this is public information yet, but they've literally, it is the moonshot effort by them. So we actually have embedded in a lot of our airline and hotel facing products, Google's AI and ML technologies. From an agency perspective and in distribution, we're beginning to do that as well. And we basically have license to most of what they offer because it's open source. The big game changer is going to be generative AI, which is fundamentally different. And we're all trying to figure this out. I had actually Google in with my board last quarter talking about this. But if you think about this, there's a couple of different applications that are pretty obvious. One is productivity, and it's operational productivity and developer productivity. We believe, for example, that we may be able to improve developer throughput by 40%, basically by having use cases that developers write or product people write done by generative AI and effectively then checked by our engineering community. And literally, we could aggressively move forward how rapidly we can solve for things. Same thing is true operationally. There's a lot that is done by agents, which even as you know, with online transactions, a lot of those are still agent assisted because of inefficiencies between the TMC and the booking tools. I live that life, so I know it. A lot of that should be able to be automated in a generative AI world. So I think that's going to be massive in terms of productivity benefits for everybody in the sector. The other one that I think is going to be very interesting, less so for corporate travel, more so for leisure travel, is the way that consumers shop and interact. Say, I want to go to Maui on these dates, and I want to stay at the Four Seasons, and I want to do this, and I'd like to, see this display, boom, and it'll come back, right? Because it's machine-led search response, and it'll be very relevant. The question is going to be, who wins in that world? Do suppliers win in that world? Do intermediaries win in that world? My conjecture would be Google is the best position because of the eyeballs they control. And then number two is think about who's got the greatest e-commerce scale in travel. It's Booking, it's Expedia, it's Ctrip. And so I think the challenge for airlines or hoteliers or car companies is how do you compete against these behemoths that have this scale to basically deploy lots of capital at generative AI and then do it at scale so that if you're searching, because you're not going to say, I want to fly this airline. You're typically going to say, I want to fly, unless you're a very loyal traveler like I am. So I think the way the consumers shop and the winners and losers from a leisure perspective are going to be marked in the next 5 to 10 years.
Excellent, thank you. Any other questions? It doesn't appear, so I'm going to ask you one last one. It's not a crystal ball. You're now an artist. You get to paint the picture of what travel landscape is going to look like in 5, 10 years. I know you touched on it, but yeah. What does that painting look like?
It's a good question. And so COVID notwithstanding, the travel industry was growing at about 4% a year for 20, 25 years successively. That's inclusive of the impacts of 9/11, the financial crisis. And corporate travel was growing at a similar 4 to 5% rate. I think corporate travel was a $1.3 trillion industry in 2019. What we've seen is obviously, especially in corporate travel, it's a smaller sector today than it was then. Volumes are about 75, 77% of what they were. Spend is actually not that dissimilar because airline and hotel prices are elevated relative to what they were 4 years ago. And so the question is, has there been structural impairment of corporate travel with Zoom and the likes of Zoom, for example? And the answer is probably to some degree. And you're all governed by CFOs who basically, they set budgets iteratively. They're not going to say you can return to what it was historically tomorrow. We're in a new world, and so there's a new baseline. So leisure has recovered to 90 to 100% of where it was. Again, corporate's much smaller on a unit basis. But I think we're going to be back into a normal 3, 4, 5% growth mode prospectively. Even if GDP growth is relatively small, the governor on travel today, one is the CFOs in corporate travel, two is airline capacity, which is still constrained relative to what it was pre-COVID. And so as that capacity comes back, I think you'll see the industry return to normal growth rates. But there is no snapback to 2019. That's just the reality of where we sit. You started off with the pace of change from a technology standpoint. I think the pace of change here is accelerating, will continue to accelerate. You're going to see consolidation amongst technology players, amongst TMCs, because all of us are in an arms race where innovation becomes the leading indicator of our ability to thrive over time. You need lots of capital to deploy at the top, and so you need to develop that technology or be partnered with the right players there. And so I think that for all of you, that means that we're going to be able to better meet traveler needs over time, we being our collective selves. And we're going to be able to basically normalize and solve a lot of this noise that's been in the industry for 11 years with NDC. I think you'll see that come together. We'll do similarly with hotel. But what it will require for you is, again, to get through the noise and make sure you're asking for that which is going to be beneficial to your programs. If you sort of just take it lying down and say, we'll abandon all these things that have brought us efficiency and cost control and transparency and comparison shopping, and you say, we're willing to give those things up, they may be gone forever. If you hold true to those principles, I think we'll end up collectively in a very good position. And I mean suppliers, intermediaries, and buyers. But the world 10 years from now will probably look more different than it looks today versus 20 years ago.
Excellent. Thank you very much. You continue to amaze me as being one of the greatest minds in the industry. Thank you. We're humbled that you would take time out to come to our symposium and share your insights with the audience. So really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.